Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining me today. A couple notes before I start this video. I have my lapel mic on my beard because if I put it on my actual lapel, the scruff of my beard just interrupts the audio. So it might look a little silly, but that's the reason. So today behind me, I have a building, and I won't tell you what it is quite yet, but I built it about 3 years ago, and you can see the space around it is pretty built up as well. So I'm going to talk about the construction of this building and some of the insights that I learned along the way. And if you guessed that it's a sauna because of the pipe up there, you're correct. So this is a sauna, and I'll bring you inside as well as a tour of the outside. And hopefully you enjoy and get some ideas for a build of your own. So before we go inside the sauna, I want to bring you on a little tour outside. And if you can imagine what this might have looked like before, this was basically just all grass and open to the back alley. So this is in the back of my house. And typically you're only going to be able to build something like this in your backyard. If you try the front yard, you'll run into some ordinance issues. So let's take a look at the fence and patio here. I put in a paver patio, that must have been about 2 years ago now. And you can see it's nice and spacious given the area that I have to work with. That came after the sauna build because I wanted to position the sauna where I wanted it in relationship to the house. Not too close, not too far, so that, I had that set, and then I was able to figure out where the patio would work best and how far I wanted to go. On this side of the sauna, between the house, you can see I could bring the patio a little further. However, realistically, for my purposes with entertaining guests or just hanging out by a fire or taking a sauna, this has been enough space to put chairs and seating and a little fire pit to enjoy a lot of privacy back here. And obviously, the fence here has that very purpose of privacy. If you look at the construction of the fence, the main timbers are old railroad ties. So that's a new idea for some of you. A lot of people will just use the 4x4 posts and, go with a standard fence like this. However, I decided to give it a little more girthy look. I like the timber, I like the thickness. If you've seen some of my past videos, that's kind of more my style. Pretty rough, rustic. This little, it's not a painting, but it's fire burned. Well, that was just an experiment with using a torch and a little bit of graffiti. That kind of, it was fun, but I don't know if I'd do it again or not. I like it enough to keep it, but this is a gate, so I take off my little gate latch here, just a log attached to the handle, and then this swings shut, and that gives me full privacy. I actually have another log right here hanging on the side of my garage. This is my garage. Latch it up, and you can see that I have full privacy from the back alley from all angles. And if you come over here, privacy fence, same construction, same design, with another gate right here, similarly set up with the log latch system. I really like that because it's simple, it's kind of old world, rustic, and I think it just fits with the overall aesthetic of the sauna itself. So we'll look at the sauna in a minute. I just kind of want to show you around. So with the privacy fence, I didn't actually completely shut it off. I kept an open side so it's easy to come in and out, and I don't need gates there or anything. But when that gate's open and that gate's open, you still get a sense that this is a nice airy open space. You don't feel too cloistered in. And I'll just give you a quick look at the backyard. We'll talk about that shed there in a future episode, but The backyard is pretty standard lot size for the municipality I'm in, but plenty of space to build an extra structure. And then there's the privacy fence from that side. So the doors here, again, I have as much open space as I can handle, or at least the potential for it, so that if I want, I can make it feel more open, feel like there's more space. Let's give that another push. So the thing I like about any of the construction projects I have is versatility. So if you need a privacy fence, it's great, but it's also nice to have it so that it opens up and it's not too cloistered, like I mentioned. So it gives you some versatility for the space, whether or not you want to have it completely private for the sauna, or if you want to have guests over and hang out, just have a fire. The more gates you can put in that match the fence, I think gives you more versatility. So that's a general picture of the outside. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments and I can maybe describe some of the thought process behind more of it. But in a minute here, we will check out the inside. One note, obviously, for a wood-fired sauna, which if you have a smokestack like that, chances are you're going to have a wood fire stove. You need wood, so I decided to stack my wood on the outside and have enough overhang to generally protect it from the rain, although they still get wet here and there. But that overhang, that eave, as they call it, is kind of a nice thing to consider when you're building yours, just to have an extra place to put your wood. And oftentimes, city ordinance or regulations will require you to cover the wood. At least in my city, which is really strict on everything, that was something that I had to keep in mind. Unless it's out of sight, in which case nobody knows and it doesn't matter. So I'll bring you around the outside here and give you some more details on the construction. Looking at the sky here, it's been cloudy for about 2 weeks, so I'm really pleased with the blue skies. It casts a few different shadows that hopefully don't conceal the construction as we talk about it, but that's a problem I'm willing to tolerate for our purposes here. So the original construction of this sauna is in line with some older city ordinances, in which if you had a secondary building, of which you're allowed 2 in this city, it had to be 120 square feet or smaller to build without a permit. So I pretty much maxed that out with the footprint. It's about 10 by whatever the math is on that. I think it's actually about 9 by 13, somewhere in there, but it was under the 120 square foot limit. So they since bumped up the ordinance for a larger footprint building, and the other outbuilding you saw is actually up to that 200 square foot mark as well. And the nice thing about keeping within those parameters without having to pull a permit is that you don't get the scrutiny. You can kind of do things how you want. Obviously, you want to do them right, but it just kind of keeps prying eyes off of your project. So those ordinances are pretty much what dictated the size of my sauna. And actually, if I could have built a bigger one, I don't know if I would have, because this has really provided all the need that I could have desired for personal use and for friends and community use. So it's a typical 2x4 frame construction with rafters, and the rafters here are exposed. You can see the roof is basically those 2x6s, and they stick out and meet at the ridge beam, which is that 4x4 sticking out. This was an idea I had because I like to have a bit of a fusion Nordic and East Asian look in my projects. As I mentioned in a previous video, I lived in China for 5 years, and a lot of the traditional architecture there I really find beautiful. And of course, I'm not Chinese, so I like to have a little bit of heritage represented in the Nordic appeal. So when you kind of get those thematic elements, it gives you a different design that I think is fairly unique, but also not too crazy or too cookie cutter, copycat type either. So that ridge beam has worked out well so far. The only problem I would say is the snow melt and the water were kind of causing it to warp upward, which made it even worse for water kind of backtracking. I never had any problems on the inside, but I decided to put this little rope here just to guide the water down before it got underneath the ridge vent there. And up top, I don't know if I can raise this high enough. I just use corrugated metal roofing. And part of that was just because I like the look as opposed to shingles. When you come down, the siding is T111 plywood siding, which is also commonly used on houses. Um, and these are 4-inch spaced grooves. So those are fairly easy to put up. I actually did put up fiberboard, which is not always used on construction projects. I definitely went overkill on this sauna, but the fiberboard is about, I want to say, a 1/2 inch thick or 5/8 inch, and that provides a little bit of rigidity but some insulation value. And then the plywood just goes directly over that. And for treating the plywood, all I did was burn it with a big old torch, just one of those propane torches that have a metal end that you've probably seen, and you can carry it around. It's fairly mobile. And so I just torched the whole thing. And I did this after it was constructed. So I did not actually treat or torch any of this prior to installation. I did it post facto or after the fact. And I torched the bottom a little more intensely just in case snow or water were to come into contact. That preserves it a little more, a little better. So if I can back up, you can see it's kind of got a zebra pattern. And that's just because with the torch, some of the wood fibers are harder than others. They're more condensed. So the less condensed ones will turn black first. And if you keep going, obviously you can get the whole thing black. But I liked that kind of zebra pattern to it. Or maybe you could say it's a tiger skin. The gable ends, the gable is the end with the angle with the roof. I decided to use cedar shakes. You can see here I did the same thing with the water. And what really pointed out that there was a problem to me was how the cedar shakes were starting to wash out. So I had to find some solution. Here we have the vent for the inside, and that's warm, moist air coming out anytime you use the sauna. So I believe partly what happened too was that kind of steamy air hit the bottom of that ridge beam, and then it started to warp, which you can kind of see from this angle that it cups up a little bit. And that has to be probably the reason, because these end ones really don't warp at all. So that's probably a design change I would make in the future, is put my venting out of vertical reach of the ridge beam or any of these top plate beams. And the other side, I think, is partially cupped because of the doorway heat escaping too. So, but other than that, minor design flaws, I decided to keep the rafters exposed and just torch them. So you can see I have venting through these, I guess you'd call them rafter channels, so that fresh air can get through. And like a typical roof on a house, you have that ventilation going up and then escaping through the ridge vent to keep a nice flow of air going and good circulation, so that moisture and stuff doesn't build up. So coming to this side again, to the entry, I just custom built a door. I put in slots for glass windows, And these windows, as far as where I got them and things, I just found some glass shelving at the local hardware store. They were 6 by 24 inches, and I just decided to use those rather than ordering specialty cut glass and getting something custom that would cost a lot more. I figured, hey, these glass shelves, they're tempered glass, which is key because they're not apt to crack or shatter, and they're very thick. I think they're almost a half inch thick. So I think these for windows are perfect because they're also basically bulletproof because of how thick they are. Um, and then of course, some of these outside features got the benches for sitting on for cooling off, and a nice deer antler that I had found for my handle, which it comes next to my latch, quote unquote, which is simply magnetized metal plates that allow the door to close on its own, but not to latch. So, as far as my own paranoia with safety, I prefer to have no latching, no handles that will turn or anything. Because if you're ever feeling, dizzy or sick in the sauna, my philosophy is have as quick and easy an exit as possible. So you don't have any handles to worry about. You just push and it opens up. So we'll pan over just to give you another look of the exterior before we go inside and see how the inside is constructed. And there I have those string lights up just for a nice nighttime effect because typically you sauna in the nighttime. And like I said, nothing is treated except for fire on the siding, and then even the gable shakes, they're cedar shakes, I didn't treat those either. So that's also partly why the water bled out some of the natural wood resin and created this kind of water blight, if you want to call it that. But I like the process, the history that is sort of engraved in the materials, even with these kind of faulty things. And even this door, I torched while it was up, and then I didn't even worry about that extra torch mark here because I thought, you know what, it kind of shows some of the history in the finished product itself about how it was built, and it tells a little story. So I like having those little Easter egg nuggets uh, in my construction because it just kind of makes it more personal and more individualized. So that's the outside of the sauna. Let's take a look inside. Coming inside, deer antler, just pull it. And here I built the foyer. I have those are called duck boards, the boards on the bottom that keep your feet off the ground. And I use the same T111 siding on the inside of the foyer here. And it does exactly what I want it to do. On either side of the entrance, I put a little wing so you can sit on this side, hang your stuff here, all custom wood trim, and nothing too complicated either. Maybe I'll shut the door so we can see better. Nothing too complicated. You can get as fancy as you would like or as rustic as you would like. On this side, you could put a chair here. I have some backrests for in the sauna. But typically, I just put my kindling and fire starter up here. And then here's the inside of the small window, the slot windows. And I replicated that window pattern here on the inside for candle windows. So I don't have any plumbing or electricity out to this sauna. It's all natural with wood-fired stove and candle-lit lighting through the windows here. For the inside chamber, I'll have to back up, so I'll open the door again. We'll get blasted with some sunlight. For the inside, I did a little experiment with this bucket as my closer. So I got it rigged up here, attached to this top hook, and it just basically goes up and down. You can tell it's gotten a lot of use. I just used the paracord for that. When I replace this next, what I'll do is I'll put a pulley here so that the cord doesn't wear out. But you can kind of see how it works. When I push the door in, it lifts up, and then I'll back out and let go, and it just closes on its own. Beautiful. So there's a foyer and then the main sauna area. Sometimes people will forgo this whole midsection and you'll just walk directly into the sauna. I think it's nice to have a barrier between the outside and the actual sauna itself. So on that note, the inside, I have benches. The floor in the foyer and in the sauna is covered in river rock. The only difference is in the sauna itself, I put down 6 mil poly to direct any moisture to this center grate. And then here I didn't put any plastic down. That's just covering dirt. So when it comes time to clean the sauna, I just wash it all down with a hose. Don't worry about cleanup. It all just soaks back into the earth. No problem. And it's worked out for a few years now. No smell, nothing as far as mold or anything like that. So the sauna is pretty good at keeping itself clean. So I'm just giving you a pano shot of the inside. As you might notice, everything in this sauna is pine. So it's knotty pine. I have tongue and groove paneling on the inside. I would advise against engineered wood like plywood. Here I have the same tongue and groove natural pine on the inside of the foyer. But the resins, the glues in this manufactured or engineered product, I don't know if it's safe or not. Once it's heated up and releases fumes, I would just as soon avoid all of that. The natural wood, obviously there's a lot of resin, sap in the wood, in the knots especially. My fear originally when I built this was, okay, is that going to be a problem? Is that going to release toxins? Is the pine resin going to, be toxic for breathing in? And so I took several saunas on my own to test it out before I had any friends over, just to make sure no one was going to die. Although I don't think the risk was really that serious to begin with. So the only downside of the pine is that it does leach out. You can tell there's a big strip there, and that's pretty close to where you would sit. In my case, I like it. I like the rawness of it. I do have another sauna that I built that I used more cedar, especially in the seating. And that's probably what I would do going forward. The knotty pine tongue and groove for the interior is cheaper, smells good, and it's just more budget friendly. However, for the seating and for the backrests, I think going forward, I'm just going to use cedar backing and cedar seating. So, ironically, for all that said, this is a cedar grate. So, I'll open that up here in a minute to show you, but I just want to give you a full radial view of the sauna. Once you come in, there's the stove. There's looking outside to the little courtyard area, the entrance duct boards, and then here is the sauna stove. So if you look at those, well, look at the lighting from the windows outside. You do get natural lighting through those outside windows that come through these interior candle windows. So even when it's closed, at least in the daytime, it's still fairly light in here, as you can tell. So you can imagine at night when it's just candlelight, it's enough light to see, and it provides a nice atmosphere for your sauna. So I made that door, the interior door, same construction as the exterior one. And I think my door construction has improved since then, although this door is still working functionally. It's not fully closed. I have to push it a little bit. But when I opened it, I decided hinges on that side would be preferable so that when you open it, you're not walking directly into the stove. And that provides a little bit of a guard. However, when it's closed, obviously there's no guard around the sauna. And that's partially intentional because there's really no space to put a guard. Typically, you'll see a wood guardrail or something, but sometimes not. So I've never had any issues in the dozens upon dozens of saunas I've taken individually or with guests. Nobody has ever had to grab onto the sauna for stability or anything like that. Or not the sauna, but the sauna stove. So since we're looking at the sauna stove, whatever you do for your sauna, you're going to want a section for the stove that is fireproof. So I have bricks that the stove is sitting on, and then the guard plates on the wall, those are about an inch removed from the wall with spacers. So it's just free air behind that, and then the spacers, and that absorbs the heat and keeps the direct heat off the wall. And that also allows you to push the sauna closer to the wall, which frees up space for your benches. Usually, depending again on how it's built and things, you're going to want to vent very close to the stove so that fresh air gets drawn in, feeds the stove through the burning chamber, and then you get a good convection current where the smoke and heat draw up through the stovepipe, and then you're getting fresh air constantly cycling in, both to feed the stove and to keep your air in here fresh. Oftentimes the door itself, you actually don't want it fully sealed. You either want a gap on the bottom or the sides so that you can have fresh air coming in. And that really does not affect the heat quality at all. In fact, it's better for the convection cycles in the stove or in the sauna chamber here. So if I back up, imagine all that fresh air is coming in. It's still hot. Let's say it's 200 degrees. You've poured some of your water here onto the stove rocks. You got a nice hot mist coming up. And all that air is not only partially cycling up through the stove, but the air inside is hitting the ceiling and then cycling where? Well, you need a vent. So this vent is the same design as the vent down here by the stove. And the whole idea here is you want it higher. You can open it. I just use PVC, and then I got a little cover here that slides. That air is cycling across the ceiling and then getting sucked out just through natural convection. And then whatever doesn't get sucked out is going to cool down, come back lower, and you're always going to have cooler air down here on the lower levels anyway. And then it's going to draw in again, and you're going to get this constant cycle of air movement. So one way to tell if a sauna is built well and if it's a better quality sauna is, do you feel direct heat coming from the stove? Is it much hotter closer than it is farther away? Or is the heat pretty much evenly distributed throughout the sauna? Obviously, in any sauna, the higher you go, the hotter it's going to be because heat rises. But what you want is an even distribution given by that constant air movement cycling through, because that's the design you want. That's the best way to get the fresh air going constantly. And if it's not, if it's just direct heat coming from the stove that gets almost intolerable the closer you get, then there's not good circulation, there's not good airflow, there's not good convection. So that's one of the telltale signs of whether or not a sauna is built well, is the air convection. Backing up to the entrance of the sauna, we'll come back down to this grate and we'll be able to see the hole I decided to build. We'll take up the grate, and then here we have almost a secret chamber. That's about 5 feet deep. And you can tell from the entrance here, I cut in little channels, and then there's the plastic that's under the rock. So however much water I spray in here to clean things off, or spray on the rocks to clean them off. It's all sloped to this midsection here, and it all drains into this chamber, which at the bottom is also full of river rock. And down there, I just noticed one of my thermometers that I had lost is down there. All the water just goes into the earth. So that rock is just directly on top of dirt, and it'll soak in. In fact, I have done experiments in the dead of winter when it's, single digits or below 0 Fahrenheit, that the water that I put down in there in a bucket does not freeze. So you actually have some geothermal heat that keeps that above freezing down there all winter, regardless of how much I use the sauna. So the original idea was that maybe I could get some geothermal heat, and there's no geothermal activity here, but perhaps the ground heat would kind of come up through this chamber and warm the sauna and keep it above freezing in here, so that any water I have, that's just clean water with soap for the benches, or my clean water here for the stove rocks, would not freeze. The reality is it still gets cold. These still freeze. So whatever water I have in buckets, I just have to be mindful that they might freeze and either be unuseful or they might ruin my buckets. So we'll put this back on and call that good. But that's what that is, in case you were wondering. So let me know what you think of this sauna. I've basically shown you all the key design elements. I do have another video on how to start the fire and how to use the sauna, keep it clean, stay safe, all that. So you can look for that one. But that's a tour. And the last thing that I could say is I think the interior dimensions here are maybe 7.5 feet by 8.5 feet. And on these benches, one person can sit up there in that corner, one, maybe two on that top bench. But most people sit on this middle bench. And on those two levels, you can comfortably sit 6 guys, and larger guys too. So if it was children or women, you could probably fit 7 or 8. But then you could also put extra people on this bottom layer where most people's feet are. And all total, if you kind of squeezed in, you could probably get 10 to 12 people easily. It'd be tight, but you could still have some nice sauna parties and things like that. So that gives you a sense of dimensions and capacity. And then I should mention the thermometer here. When the stove starts warming up, this will actually max out. And then I'll have to go to my other thermometer up here, which is just an oven thermometer. And usually you want to get that oven thermometer up to minimum 150. I wouldn't even use the sauna until it was at 150. Or closer to 200 is a good, comfortable temp. So usually 175 to 200, or really 175 to 190. 200, 210 are doable, but it gets pretty hot at that point. So you just need a couple thermometers to help you keep track. And depending on the season or how cold it is, this will take an hour, maybe hour and a half to get up to temp. So it's a process. It's not an immediate gratification thing, but it's well worth it. So we'll back out of the sauna here, give you another kind of sense of scale and depth, and we'll sign off. Thanks for joining, and hopefully this gives you some ideas for a sauna that you can build or have built and enjoy a nice little backyard sanctuary like I have in the midst of a fairly busy large city or in the suburbs. a little unique hiding spot for your own personal health and entertainment of friends and family. Okay, quick note, we're not actually done quite yet because I just remembered something that people will be curious about, and that is insulation. So for this sauna, I built it basically the same way that you would build a house, as far as the layers of insulation and the type of insulation and stuff. So you saw outside there was the siding, and then underneath that I had mentioned that there was the fiberboard. That's that's as much as I have on the outside, and then on the inside for insulation I put rock wool insulation, and then over the rock wool insulation I put poly, which is that plastic sheeting, and I did that all around. So the entire thing is insulated. In the roof for the attic insulation, I did the same rock wool and also poly sheeting. And then over that, in here in particular, not in the foyer, I put in that silver bubble insulation. I'll show you pictures at the end of the video. And then over that silver bubble insulation, I put in some, well, I didn't put in, but I installed boards. I think I used 1x material about every 2 feet going horizontal. And then I used those horizontal boards to nail on the tongue and groove. So you have rock wool insulation, poly, and then the tinfoil bubble insulation. I'm not really sure what that's called actually. And then I have an air gap behind the paneling here. And that air gap is achieved by using furring strips or boards to keep the paneling off that bubble layer. So the pictures at the end of the video will kind of show you. But I did do everything, kind of to the max. And on that note, I kept track of the material costs on this, but since I built it, I didn't keep track of the labor costs. But the material costs for all that, all the insulation, siding, the stove stack, the pipe, everything you see was about $11,500. And that was in 2021. So if you remember anything from those days, post COVID or during COVID, there were a lot of supply chain issues and a lot of backup on lumber and things like that. So a lot of the lumber prices were really high. I can't honestly remember if siding was affected very much or some of the elements, but I think prices were a little higher back then. Of course, today, if prices in materials have gone down, you have to factor in the rise in inflation. So it's not unrealistic to think that you're going to probably spend around 12 grand in just materials for a structure like this, if you insulate it to the extent I did, et cetera, et cetera. If you add labor onto that, at least double that. So you're looking at probably 20 grand for a structure like this. And the stove itself, with the stove stack and everything, that alone was about $2,000. So obviously, I was able to save a lot of money by doing this myself and not having to pay the labor costs. And for me, since I enjoy this stuff, that's no cost to me at all. But one quick note on the foundation. So that big board here, this is a 4x6, 4-inch. Oh, sorry, I'm pointing at the 2x4. Right here, underneath this 2x4 threshold, is the foundation. So I just use 4x6 green treated timbers, made a square, or really a rectangle, and I secured those on top of a combination of river rock and stones that kind of formed the foundation that the river rock was set in. And then I put sand over that to get these timbers all level and everything. And then I shoved rebar down through these timbers into the ground to provide lateral stability. And then from there, once that was all done, I just framed it up like you would a typical frame job. So that's what I did. Again, nothing on the inside as far as flooring besides earth, and then just covering that earth with river rock. And then to make sure that the timbers, which you can see, that's foundation right there. And then I have the siding kind of offset from that. I put river rock around to slope so any water would quickly drain away. And so far, nothing has shifted. This is in a region of the world where we get some pretty intense weather extremes as far as freezing, snow, etc., etc. And it has been a very stable structure this whole time. And it's about 3 years old. So hopefully that also gives you some insights where you have to start, which is the foundation, and questions about insulation and such too. So that should cover everything for the sauna, and hopefully that was a helpful addition.